morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've made the connection and are with us today. I'm Lori Fitz, your host. And the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us, that get us thinking, get us imagining, get us curious, and get us connected. Joining me today is Jennifer Moses. She is an author, a painter, and all-around brilliant mind. She is an engaging artist who has a really sharp eye for giving us glimpses into worlds and deeper perspectives of the characters in those worlds. Her work has been published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. Welcome, Jennifer. I'm so glad you're joining me today.
I'm even gladder. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So you have a collection of short stories coming out on Monday.
That's right. Except I think it might be Tuesday. I think I might have given you that information. But we'll
Monday,
forgive
Tuesday,
the publisher.
Next week.
It's out there. It's out there.
We could get people looking on Monday and then buying on Tuesday. How's that?
Yeah, no, it's available it's been available for purchase for about 2 weeks as far as I know. I don't know much because like everybody else, I'm indoors all the time.
Yes. Well, that's
right?
part of what I want to ask you about art during the pandemic.
All right.
The book is called and it's a collection of short stories, "The Man Who Loved His Wife." So,
Correct.
how have you pulled this together during the pandemic? I'm very fascinated with artists who are working and producing during the pandemic. How did it all pull together?
Well, I don't know how it is for other creative people, but for me, I've never really liked other people. That's not true. I've always been a homebody. I'll put it that way. I've always preferred quietude and being home with my books and my dogs and my garden to sort of going out there in the hurly-burly of the world. So, as my husband's pointed out a bazillion times, since the pandemic shut us all down, my life has changed actually very little. Because all these years, I mean, I have grown children now. But since my eldest was born, and he's 31, I quit my job when he was born. That I haven't had an actual job for 31 years.
But you've been writing. You've been writing.
Right. No, I've been working. I just haven't been employed.
Got it.
So I haven't gone anywhere.
Right.
I haven't had the daily routine of going to the office and picking up my coffee and
the corporate setting, all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
All of it. And so for me, going up to my third floor and sitting myself down at my computer is what I do anyway. So doing it during a pandemic made very, very little difference in my daily routine.
So how did you come to decide to pull your short stories together?
So the short stories, that's sort of actually a 3-part or 4-part question, but I'll just go back to part 1 in my mind, which is that short stories were enormously popular form in this country and in Europe as well for all through the age of the great magazines. I'm going to say almost through the 60s, maybe even into the 70s, when fewer and fewer, around the 70s and the 80s, fewer and fewer big magazines published them. They couldn't quite compete with television.
Sure.
So what had been an enormously popular form sort of got pushed over into the corner with fewer outlets. That said, it's always been a natural form for me. So since I started writing short stories in high school. I'm not saying I'd want to read them now, but it was just a form I naturally took to. And despite they're having sort of no commercial or business appeal, they're a very natural form for me. I mean, I also write long form. I write novels and I've written long form nonfiction as well. But for short stories for me are just they're just a natural place to go. And so I started the stories that make up the 13 stories that make up the collection, The Man Who Loved His Wife. Some of them were actually published like 20 years ago, and some of them were published much more recently. The most recent publication one of the stories was published in a magazine just 2 months ago. In other words, 2 months before the collection came out. So I've been working on these stories for a long time, and they come to me as a writer when they come to me, and I can't really force that. I have to wait for when the inspiration hits. It hits, and then I have to sit down and write the story while the story is being given to me, which is how it feels. It feels like the story is being given to me, and I need to write it. I need to pay attention to that voice that's coming in through me and then through my hands as I type. So the stories, when I put the collection together as a collection, I tried to choose stories that thematically had a thematic consistency. In this case, what it means to be a Jew in the world today. What is it? What is it to be Jewish in our world now? And so that's the theme that runs through the stories. But I also try to balance the collection out, not only background, the settings of the stories. So one story, for example, is set in Europe, and another story is set in Long Island. But who the stories are about? Are they about an adolescent boy who has his first crush? The first story in the collection is about a survivor, not a Holocaust survivor, a refugee, who lands, an elderly refugee with all his terrible memories of the war, who lands as a young man through the port of New Orleans, and he's looking, sort of examining his life. And so there are different points of view in the collection. Various stories have different points of view, different characters. Each story is its own. They're like little novelettes. It's its own encapsulated world with the characters who inhabit that drop of time and that place in the world.
How did it feel to go back over 20 years and review and feel like what resonated most with you? What was that process like for you?
It wasn't as romantic as you make it sound.
Well, of course.
It sounds really so wonderful. It was, as I said, it was more trying to craft a balance in these stories, because I've published at this point in my many years. I've published probably 80 short stories over the decades, in small magazines and literary magazines. And of those 80 or so stories, maybe 30 or 35 of them are within a kind of Jewish framework versus just not, something else. So I really just looked at my CV, and I went, oh yeah, that story would work well. Such and such a story would work well as an accompaniment, or as a different flavor from the one that comes before.
What I always enjoy about you, Jennifer, is that you're able to be so clear-eyed about your writing. I mean, you've always talked about it as a craft and something that you have to work. That it is work to create a good piece. But on this,
it's work.
But you balance, and I get into your writing, and it's these rich characters that are just amazing to get to know.
Well, thank you. I mean, of course that's what all writers of fiction hope to put on the page, and many writers of nonfiction as well, who bring us real life characters.
Sure.
That you want to empathize with the people on the page. And that's the magic of reading, right?
Yes.
You get to enter other worlds and feel like you're inside somebody else's mind or family or town or place.
And you can live there for that
and
period of time.
And you can live there.
Yes.
And you can live there. And sometimes it's not pleasant, and you
Right.
put the book down. Like, I don't want to live here anymore.
Or I want to. It's hard, but I want to know more. I mean, you
that
create.
might be like,
you create that intrigue that even though it's maybe hard, you want to be there to find out what are they learning? What's up with this? What's
Right. So
you're a
that would be like
guide.
right. So like with Faulkner, I don't know why Faulkner springs to mind.
Hmm.
Faulkner is really hard, but right,
Hmm.
we want to go there because Faulkner's a genius.
Right.
My work is not difficult for the reader. It just isn't.
It's very
Um,
accessible.
it's very accessible. It's not. I mean, it's literary work. It's not beach reading. It's not. It
Hmm.
doesn't dabble in stereotypes or like let's have sex on every other page to
Right.
so
Right.
keep it.
Right.
Or
Page
there are no
Turner. Yeah. Yeah.
aliens.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not dystopian. It's
No.
not genre work. It's high. It's high end literary with a capital lit kind
Hmm.
of stuff, but it's very very accessible. And because um, that's what I like to read. I like to read stuff that my own tastes run to again sort of high end what I call literature with a capital L,
Hmm.
but it's not. Dickens is not hard.
No.
Dickens is hilarious.
And he
Um,
published his through
Tolstoy
magazines,
isn't
right?
hard.
Right. What didn't Dickens?
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
he was serialized. He
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
serialized.
Yeah.
But Tolstoy's not hard. Tolstoy is kind of grand Russian master of high Russian soap opera,
And
right?
it seems to me his belief was if you could, it was that art was something if you could share and all whistle, that was
Right,
art because there was a commonality, something that pulled us together that we could go, yes, we feel this
right.
together,
Great
a kind of a
art,
community of art.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I to this day I firmly believe that great art is accessible. Is accessible to all of us
Hmm.
really because it's really just a reflection of our common humanity.
Hmm.
That's what it's about. It's about being human and what it means to be human. Um, and so if it talks down to us, it's not really letting the rest of us in. And if it's just dumb, it's entertainment, which is fine too. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
there's nothing entertainment that is good. Look, I watch Netflix with as much pleasure as the next girl. So,
Well,
yeah.
I wish we didn't have to take a break, but we have to take a break. I love the fact that you're looking at doing this is a deep dive into what it means to be Jewish, and giving us access to that. And the stories are amazing, and we'll be talking more about the stories in each of the upcoming segments. So stay with us and stay with Jennifer and her marvelous worlds that she brings to us. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host, and joining us today is Jennifer Moses. She is author and a painter and all-around brilliant, engaging artist. And we were talking in the first segment about the various worlds and the amazing characters that inhabit those worlds that she brings to us. Her work has been published in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. She's got this great book of a collection of short stories, The Man Who Loved His Wife. It's available now online, so you can go right now to either mayapplepress.com or amazon.com. Either Monday or Tuesday, it's coming to the booksellers. So, if you like going to bookstores, which I like to do, and that the retail bookstores is open and you can keep socially distanced, go for it. Because this is a great time during our slowdown in the world and taking a breath, and during our pandemic to have a chance to read. And why not read a really good collection of short stories? Welcome, Jennifer. I'm so glad you're here today.
Me too. Yeah. You go. You go.
Well, if there's something else that you want to share from what we were talking about, please feel free. I do want to start having you tell us a story about your stories.
I actually do have a story that
Okay.
I do want to share that,
Yeah.
Lori, you will completely understand. So, you and I met in high school in
Yes.
Virginia,
Yes.
but we didn't really get to know each other until our 40th reunion some years ago.
Yeah.
Sorry if I'm
No,
outing our
no,
age.
no, no, no. We are delightfully embracing our
I am.
60s. I love
I
being in
love
my
it.
60s. Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
I love it
Yes.
because I don't give a fig about the things I used to care about. So, but anyway, so you and I went to high school in McLean, Virginia,
Yeah.
and we were the home of the Langley Saxons, right? The Saxons.
I mean, how white bread
Okay.
can we get?
Yeah, right. So when I first started dating my husband, who like me is Jewish,
uh,
and he grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia that was probably a quarter Jewish, like there were Jews
uh-huh,
around.
uh-huh.
Um, he just thought that was the funniest thing in the world.
It is.
And of course, I didn't get it. I growing up, I didn't get how funny that was for me personally.
We're
I mean,
celebrating Anglo-Saxons.
yes, and that had been my entire school environment until I went to college in
Uh-huh.
Boston, where there were other Jews.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know that my upbringing was not typical
Uh,
for American Jewish kids who not I mean there of course there's every variety,
mhm,
but most, I would say most American Jews, even the very non-religious, um, typically live in suburbs where there are at least a handful of other Jewish families
mhm, mhm,
or cities or
mhm.
wherever, but not not in the capital, the very center of Anglo-Saxon, waspy, horsey, you know, American
Yes.
lifestyle,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I experienced no anti-Semitism growing up, but it wasn't again till I went to college that I realized, like, oh, that's why I never quite felt like I fit in.
Mhm.
Right? It wasn't, again, it was not because I experienced, as I said, I didn't experience anything icky, anything racist or anti-Semitic, or I experienced the usual junk that kids experience at the
Sure.
hands of other kids, but that's normal.
But that
So
sense of the Jewish community was not
we didn't
part
have one.
of your, yeah, of
I didn't know any
growing up.
Jews outside my own family,
Mm-hmm.
and we were German Jews.
Mm-hmm.
In Yiddish, the expression is Yeki.
Mm-hmm.
A Yeki is a German Jew, meaning a German Jew. When if a non-German Jew, I mean, we're all in America American Jews, but
Mm-hmm.
our ancestry is different. We come from different parts of the globe. My family came mainly from German lands, and German Jews were considered by Yiddish-speaking Jews to be Yekis. Yeki is the word that is a Yiddish word that means German Jew,
Mm-hmm.
but it has a very negative connotation. It means stuck up.
Ah.
It's just what it really. That's the connotation. It means
Uh-huh.
stuck up. So I was from this family who we didn't use Yiddish, and we didn't. We were waspier than wasps, right? So we were not emotive. We were pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We skied without, and if we lost our mittens, it was too bad. Stiff upper lip, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And so this was not natural to my genetic inheritance,
Uh,
which I didn't know
Wait a
until
minute.
many
Something's
years
missing
later,
here.
right? So, and of course I'm joking about my genetic
Yeah.
inheritance,
Yeah.
but when I
No.
discovered Jewish and Yiddish literature and history, it was just um, it was like a revolution inside my soul. It's like, oh, I'm home now inside the pages of these books.
And a celebration of that.
Yeah, and then I began writing it myself.
Right.
Right. Then I began kind of. This is what we were talking about in the earlier segment, that
Mm-hmm.
um, you mentioned that writing and really all art is an awful lot of hard work, and that's incontestable. However, it's two-sided. You get good enough at it, you do it enough, and it begins to flow through you. So, for example, I know you were a very accomplished childhood pianist. You shared that with me before. I started playing the piano at the age of 50, so I'm not so accomplished, but I do have a marvelous teacher who has banged it into my head that the flow comes after you put in your requisite 10,000 hours, right?
Right. Right.
Well, I put in my 10,000 hours writing incredibly bad, you name it, writing, all my youthful writing. I probably had put that 10,000 hours in before I was 30. So by the time I'm 30, I began in my 30s to get into that flow state, not all the time at all.
Mm-hmm.
The flow
Mm-hmm.
state comes from the work. So the stories in this collection, The Man Who Loved His Wife, are largely a result of that flow state. I did not work these stories. They just, every single one of them just came through me. When I write long work novels, it's a different deal.
Uh-huh.
I can't, I've never sustained a flow that goes, 300 pages. But for 12 or 15 or 20 pages, the stories tend to come out whole, and then I go back and I edit them, because there's always it's usually for me it means I need to tighten. I've overwritten here and there, but the story comes out complete. Like the blueprint is complete. The foundation is there.
And there's a strong trajectory. I mean, you're able to have that beginning, middle, and end sensibility that can take place over a longer period in a novel. But
Right.
you create that moment that is enough heightened intensity that we can dip in and be in that
Right.
world.
And for me, it's not at this point anything cerebral or conscious. When it happens, for me like that, where I sort of just start in the morning, and by the end of the day, or maybe by the end of the next day, I've given birth to a story. It's um, it comes out as if by nature, as if I'm taking dictation from God. But that's after banging my head against the computer
Mhm.
for 50 odd years. So it didn't just I didn't just sit down as a child genius. Right?
Right,
I
right.
wasn't who could, or as
You've
a
done your
Mozart,
scales.
or
You've worked your scales,
exactly. I
so
mean,
then the
even
music can come.
Mozart,
Yeah,
as you know, again, as a musician, Mozart, it's sort of um, the truism, the popular idea about Mozart was he just took down the notes, right? He
yeah.
famously said he took down the notes, but he did take down the notes. But that was after he spent, golly, years
Right.
and years and years and years and years studying and practicing and studying and working his butt off.
When it
And he was a genius.
Yes, well, yeah. Well, when
Yeah,
the,
yeah, and that.
and there's that too. But the characters, I'm fascinated how the characters come to you. And
They just come.
are they because they're so distinct and they have such a richness. And when you say birthing, it does feel like these characters were born fully formed, with such
Well,
dimension.
yeah, they feel like that. Actually, I have I love to tell the story. So my baby boy, who's 27, is in graduate school now, but and he is on campus. He's doing it in person, kind of. But he came home. He had a month long winter break, and so he came home, and I needed new eyes on the manuscript was still in it was still in page proofs. I
Yeah.
needed somebody to do a final proofreading of it. I'd proofed it, the editor had proofed it, the sub editor had proofed it, and we'd all gone blind proofing, and I'm a terrible proofreader anyway.
Yeah.
And I asked Jonathan, my son, to do it for me, and he did, which was immensely helpful. But after he'd read the first two or three stories, he said, Mommy, how did you do that? And
Oh.
I just kind of pointed out towards the sky. And Jonathan is a very spiritual, he's actually an Orthodox Jew. He's kind of an Orthodox hippie. He's immersed in Jewish studies, and he's lived in Israel and so forth. And he he just got it. Like, okay, right? He gets it because he's oriented that way. Like, I would say a business person, a typical really smart business person or a great lawyer wouldn't get that. Just
Right.
pointing to the sky, because people with that kind of mind, very located in the left brain,
Hmm.
um, don't experience that kind of downloading thing. Right? They're working from a different part of their brain.
Or
I'm way
maybe
off topic.
maybe you're working more from your heart.
I don't.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it feels that way.
Yeah.
I imagine a neurologist would have something to say about that. It does feel
Yes.
like it feels like it's coming from a very deep place. It's
Right.
not even my heart. It's from my kishkas, which is
Yeah.
again a Yiddish
The
word
soul.
that means guts. No, it
Yeah.
means guts. It's
Guts.
like
Okay.
something like deep. It's like your intuitions and your inner knowing, right? that sometimes you feel like you have a gut reaction to something.
Yes.
Your stomach knows
Yes.
before your brain does.
And sometimes the little hairs on the back of your neck, and there's just
Mhm.
something that sets off, and and there, I believe at some point we'll be able to scientifically know what that is to a certain degree. I mean, animals have it. There is something that
Absolutely.
connects us in a deeper way than we don't understand, and that we're able to sense and connect and communicate in ways that are
Of
beyond
course.
verbal and beyond even knowing. It
Well, right. I mean, our present day system in the United States, for better and for worse, kind of pushes all that stuff aside. But
right,
of course we are. Of course we're
right.
connected, non-verbally and intuitively and energetically and all that stuff. And our ancestors knew that.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
I need to take a break again. But
Okay.
we
See
will
you
be
soon.
back and we will talk
Okay.
more. I want to make sure the audience knows it's The Man Who Loved His Wife. Available now. You can go to Amazon or you can go to the mayapplepress.com. Coming out in the bookstores next week. Fabulous collection of short stories. You must get it. You must read it. So we'll be right back and we'll talk more with Jennifer about her work. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host. And joining me today is Jennifer Moses. We've been talking about her brilliant new collection of short stories, The Man Who Loved His Wife. And as we were talking about, it's really about Jews being Jewish, as you have said in some of your promotional materials,
Correct.
as the subject matter of these stories. I want to make sure the
Mhm.
audience knows you can get this online right now. So you can go to mayapplepress.com or Amazon. And we're just having a wonderful time just getting to know how you put these stories together, what the stories are about, all of that wonderful stuff. And this collection, you've shared that it's whether it's in Tel Aviv or New Jersey or the Deep South. How are these characters grappling with God, their loved ones,
Right.
fate, death, hope, Hitler, transcendence, and 4,000-year-old history of Judaism?
Mhm. Yep. Just that.
Just that. Just a few.
Yeah,
Just, you know.
it's Jews being Jews, but let me add, if I might, that
Yes.
it's Jews being Jews the way the Neapolitan Italian characters in Alana Ferrante's novels are distinctly Neapolitan, but they're us. They're
Right.
They're just all
Absolutely.
us. Right, so it's not as if only it's not.
No,
This is not a Jewish
no,
book
no, no, no,
for
no.
a Jewish audience
No.
only.
But it's rich in culture. And
Right,
and
it's yeah. If you want to know, like, right, it gives you a flavor of what it's like
yes.
to live inside a Jewish skin rather than a non-Jewish skin.
But and
Um,
I love cultural. Yeah, a lot of the work that I do outside of radio is what we call cultural intelligence. How do we keep
mhm,
learning about cultures? And the more
mhm,
cultural savvy we have, the better we are at really being connected and empathetic
right,
and understanding. And we keep breaking barriers of what we think in our
mhm,
head, and I love that. I love being able to
mhm,
keep widening our perspectives, widening our horizons of
right.
exploring the world, and you give us such access to that.
Well, that's the American promise and
Yes.
dream, right? That's
Yes.
sort of what we do here
What,
when we do it.
well, our country was
Right.
founded on an idea. Oh my
Mhm,
gosh. I mean, what
mhm,
countries are founded on an idea of
mhm,
that we're all
mhm,
equal? Well, if we're all
mhm,
equal, gosh, let's get to know each other's
mhm.
culture and celebrate it.
There you go.
Exactly.
Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
I'd love to uh, talk a little bit about some of the stories.
Okay.
I loved Uncircumcised. Let's start with that one, but then we'll
Oh,
go
the
back to
uncircumcised.
we'll go to the Holy Messiah maybe and get to the
Okay.
teacher. But let's start with I just adored it. So tell me more.
Okay, thank you. So the uncircumcised, I originally called this collection the uncircumcised
Uh-huh.
after this lead story. And my editor said, the publisher said, we can't call it that because I'll get cuckoo crazy
Yes.
postings from like weird sex stuff.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, no. Well, she said, yeah, trust me, we will. So I left it as the as the title of the particular short story, but it is not the title of the collection. So, The Uncircumcised is the story of an elderly man named Felder who lives in Baton Rouge. He's a refugee. His entire family is murdered by Nazis when he's a young teenager. And the story opens in Baton Rouge, right as he has been given a dog as a pet. His middle-aged, kind of fussy, henpecky kind of daughter has given him this dog so he can have company. It's a golden retriever, and he immediately gets the idea that the golden retriever is the reincarnation of his dead older sister, who he doesn't know. He never knew what happened to her, but he does know that she disappeared in Belsen, and so he assumes that she was murdered by the Nazis. So the story really unfolds as a the story about his relationship with this dog who he loves, and his relationship with his past, and his relationship with his fussing middle-aged daughters who kind of want to infantilize him, and
Hmm.
that's not what he wants for himself. So why is it in Baton Rouge of all places,
Right,
Louisiana?
right.
It's in Baton Rouge, Louisiana of all places because I lived there for 13 years. My husband and I mainly raised our children there. We now live in New Jersey, and I had a little mutt, a little rescue dog named Marion, and pretty much every day I walked Marion around City Park, which was near our house. And I was walking Marion one day, and it just came to me that I could write a story about a Yiddish speaking dog.
I love it.
And that's where it ended. And I was like, "Oh, what a great idea." And
Uh-huh.
it just that was it.
Uh-huh.
It was just this idea. And I tried it this way, I tried it that way. I got a paragraph here, I got a paragraph there, and it just stopped. I was like, okay, it's not happening. And then I went on to do whatever else I was doing. And years later, I sat down, I went back to that story. I saw the first paragraph only, and the whole rest of the story came out within about, in one day. It just flowed right through. So that story, so Baton Rouge, where we lived all those years, is a city these days of over 300,000, I believe. It's a majority black city these days. It wasn't when we moved there. It was always close. Now it's majority black, and in that among those 300,000 citizens of the city versus the parish of Baton Rouge, there are maybe 1,000 Jews.
Mm.
So it wasn't really, Baton Rouge is not actually a center of Jewish or Yiddish culture.
Hmm. It's not a big community there.
No,
Yeah.
Tel Aviv, no, not
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
much,
No, no,
right?
you're right.
Brooklyn, nah.
Uh-huh.
So, but we did have a very, very close knit and wonderful Jewish community, and it was lovely, lovely in many ways. But that's where that story came from. That was like the germ of the story. But meanwhile, I was reading and still read everything I can get my hands on from Yiddish literature, everything that I can get, meaning everything that's been translated into English, because I do not know Yiddish myself.
Uh-huh.
I know the common Yiddish words that most uh, Jews, at least in the East, most that many Americans know that have been brought to us, and from everybody from Woody Allen to Seinfeld on TV, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So the sort of common Yiddish words have filtered out into American English. So I know that stuff, but I don't know Yiddish. I do speak Hebrew, but Hebrew is a Semitic language. It has nothing to do with Yiddish, which is
Right.
really a German language. So, um, but
Well,
that's where that story came from, and it's a very, very, very sad story.
yeah.
It's very sad. There's a moment in the story where the elder Felder is being asked. There's like a there's a where he's being asked by young students, was the Holocaust something like racism in Baton Rouge today?
Uh,
And he just explodes. He's like,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
right? No, no,
yeah.
no. So he's short tempered with these sort of um,
And yet
misunderstandings.
the connection to Esther, or he doesn't
Right?
call his dog Esther though, right? But he
He does.
oh he does.
He
Okay, that's
does.
right. So the connection to Esther, um, in her stillness, in her statue like. I mean, she's there in such a presence that
Well, the
that
dog talks back to him,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
In his mind, we
yeah,
don't know, in his mind, the dog is a reincarnation
yeah,
of his sister,
yeah,
period.
yep,
Straight up. His daughters, meanwhile, think he's gone cuckoo, that
yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah.
very demented. The reader, I don't know what the reader thinks. I think the reader just goes along with it. And they're talking about old times, and she tells him what happened to her, and they're having these conversations in Yiddish. Of course, I don't read or write Yiddish, so
Uh-huh.
what I'm writing as the author is English, Yiddish sounding English, what I
Right,
call
right.
English, American English with Yiddish. So no, you're going to tell me what happened,
Oh,
right?
no,
It's got an accent.
when I read it, I believed. I mean, I didn't think the dog was really talking. I believed he went to place when he was with his dog that allowed him to connect that way, and that
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
yeah, that's in the mind of the reader. However,
yes,
the reader
yeah,
takes the
yeah,
relationship.
yeah,
As the author, I wasn't really, as I said earlier, I don't really think it through.
yeah,
My guts are taking
yeah.
over by the time I'm that deep into the
Uh-huh.
writing of the story. Um, it's when my head takes over when I'm writing that I'm in trouble. You don't want to go into that
Uh,
neighborhood. No. So yeah, so Felder is kind of, a kind of tragic um, character, kind of tragic figure, but also a kind of um, tragic comic figure.
yes.
The great masters of Yiddish literature, all of them, from Chaim Grad to both the Singer brothers. There's famously Isaac Bashevis Singer, but his brother, and I'm blocking on his name, was also a master of the Yiddish form. All the great masters of Yiddish, from Dernister, so forth, they basically wrote in this sort of tragic comedic form. That's what they did. It always had that sprinkling of both, and to the degree that my own short story, this lead story in the collection, does that, um, which is what I had aimed to do, is
Mm-hmm.
because I've read so many of the masters,
Mm.
and they get into you, they get inside, and they start talking to you. Um,
Eh,
so
eh,
I'm not trying to be imitative.
no, no,
It's
no,
a
no. It's very
rhythm. It's
rich.
a rhythm.
Yeah,
It's more like a rhythm, a way of seeing the world as tragicom. It's not black. It's not white. It's always that mix.
it's both.
Hmm. Yeah.
And with that, I need to take my last break for our show. We're talking with Jennifer Moses, who has compiled a collection of short stories, The Man Who Loved His Wife. You can go to Amazon.com or MapleApplePress.com and get it online, and it'll be coming to our bookstores early next week. So stay with us. We have one more wonderful chance to be talking with Jennifer and her book. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. I'm your host, Lori Fitz, and we have been having a wonderful conversation with Jennifer Moses, who's both an author and painter. Her work's been in all kinds of wonderful places, in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. She's got a collection of short stories. It's available right now. If you want to go and order it, I encourage you to do that. Go right online to either Amazon.com or MayApplePress.com. It's coming out in the bookstores early next week. And I blew through most of our commercial breaks, Jennifer, because I was enjoying our conversation. So we only have really a few minutes left to talk about your book. I also want to encourage people not only to go and look at her book and buy the book, but go to her website, JenniferAnnMosesArts.com, and get to know her other work too. You've got some beautiful books and essays and great things that folks should know about that you've given to us.
Thank you.
So in these last 3 minutes or so.
3 minutes.
Yes,
Okay.
I've got 3 minutes. Why don't you just share some of the other topics in the stories, just kind of top line, what other things that we can find
Okay.
in A Man Who Loved His Wife?
So as I said, it's 13 stories, and each of them is quite different from the other. There's only one story in the collection that comes both from life and sort of from the headlines. That story is called The Teacher. And The Teacher is the story of a teacher at a private school, a fancy private day school in a fancy, cushy suburb in Virginia.
I think I know that
So
school.
I myself went to a private school. My parents were cuckoo crazy. They sent their Jewish daughter to this, basically an English public school in Virginia, where like everyone had their own horse and a house in Maine, and nobody was even brunette, let alone like Jewish. It was very whatever. It was a crazy decision.
I absolutely
We wore
know.
uniforms. We played, we wore uniforms. We sang around the maypole, and we sang Latin songs, and we played field hockey, but not me because I was a bad athlete. So anyway, during my time there, nothing in this happened to me or to any of my siblings. There was a teacher, a very popular teacher I think he taught history, and when I was in middle school there, the rumors started flying around him. And my best friend had a sister who had a strange incident with him, but we weren't really allowed to talk about it. Well, 40 years later, there are headlines coming out that this same actual real man was still teaching, and a woman now in her 50s had seen him going into another private school and said, that's the same man who raped me when I was 13, or something like that. I might be getting the details wrong. And she said, what is he doing out with children, right? And she started things up. She was very brave, and he was finally, there was a trial. And many of his then very young victims, now middle-aged or older women, testified, and some didn't because it was too traumatic. And so the story is actually based on that.
Wow.
So it's sort of based on being my own lived experience of being this sort of outcast Jewish kid in this ultra waspy little school where only you wanted to be in with this teacher. He was considered the coolest of the cool.
And Jennifer, I've got 30
Are we done?
I've got 30 seconds. I wish I could have
that
a whole other
story-
hour.
So my former classmates are going like crazy. They want to know, did it happen to you?
Yes.
I'm like, it's fiction. It's fiction, dude. It's fiction.
And with that, I have to leave it with, go buy The Man Who Loved His Wife. You can get it at themayapflepress.com and amazon.com. I promise to bring Jennifer back because there's so much more that we need to talk about with Jennifer. Thanks for joining us today on Connections Radio Show. Have a great week, and we'll get connected next week.